And Urate and Tom are coming through the area today, so they should actually already be here. And we're going to get with them for dinner. They're going to come over here. She's bringing curry and a few things that she's made. She's an awesome chef. And we don't have it scheduled yet, but Michael has talked to her, and she's willing to do the food if we do an intensive here in Abingdon, excuse me, which is about 20 minutes from where we are in Bristol. And that looks like that's probably going to be in March. He can verify that when he gets on and let you know what intensive he plans on doing. We will get a flyer made up and posted and get people starting to sign up on it so we can confirm it. It's a nice little facility in Abingdon, Virginia that we used before for Laws of Living. So Michael's with us now. I was just saying that we were looking at doing an intensive, and Urate's agreed to do the food. Was that later in March? I couldn't remember quite.
It would probably be the latter part of March or early April, yes. If it all comes together, we need to get with the facility and see how dates would work. And we do a 9-day why is this happening to me again, and then add to it a 9-day teacher training. So it would be a 17-day altogether when we add them together. And people could do the 9-day section or the whole 17 days. And of course, doing the full intensive, those folks would get preference on attendance. So we'll see how it all comes together. If you're interested, drop Jeanie a note at jeanie@whyagain.org, and we'll get you on the list. But beyond that, do we have anybody in the phone queue with a hand up or anything happening in the chat room, sweetie?
Nope, it is all quiet on this end.
All right. Then let's go back and look at where we are with the Book of Thomas. And we were talking yesterday about the idea of cutting away from the unconscious, those things that never belonged. And that became a cutting away, or mutilating actually, of a child's genitals in circumcision. Kind of sadly, but that's what it is for today. And so that was saying number 53. And we're heading into 54. And if you haven't been with us before, what we're doing is we're covering the sayings from the Book of Thomas. It's a text that, as opposed to a story gospel, is purported to be the secret teachings of Yeshua as written down by Thomas Didymus. And if you remember, Yeshua said to those who don't have the brain cells, in essence, he was saying, those who don't have the inner understanding, I'm giving them parables. And it says very clearly, without a parable, he did not teach. And then he said to the disciples, so you've been around me long enough that you've been developing the brain cells, although there are many things I would still say to you, but you can't hear them until you have the brain cells. So we're going to work on developing that. And if you really want to develop a deep set of brain cells for understanding the original Aramaic teachings of Yeshua and what it is we're doing these tools, go back into our archives, day 1, 14 years ago, and start listening. And every show is about building the brain cells for what the tools are, how to use them, comprehension of where it is that we're heading. You can't expect the normal, what the scriptures called the mind of man, to understand what this work is about any more than you can expect a fly to look around the room that I'm in and understand a TV set and a piece of art and a light and a fan and a man with a phone in his hand. The fly is never going to understand that. Your carbon-based memory is never going to understand that. So you can give that one up. And in fact, the ultimate goal of this work is if we call what comes from carbon-based memory and the constructs of the mind called perception, then in order to really heal and understand, pardon me, you've got to be out of your mind. And that's what we're looking to, is to support you in spending time free of your mind and all of its stories. You know, that old saying, there are a million stories in the naked city. Well, there are generations and generations and generations of stories within our minds. And when an event in our lives matches one of those stories, then resonance causes that story, no matter how long ago it was in the genes, to become activated and contribute to the thing we call perception. And perception, recognizing that it is nothing more than a construct of the mind. That's all it is. And it comes from carbon-based memory, and the fact that it's stored there means it's from the past. And so everything that the mind does is some variation on the theme of the past. So if you want to get more into that, then you might want to read my book, Why Is This Happening to Me Again? Because people who live out of carbon-based memory, all that mind can do is replicate whatever's in it. 1,000 variations, but that's all it can do. And when you realize there are generations and generations and generations of information, a good video to watch if you want to get a deeper handle on that principle is jump on YouTube and put in the search bar, I get the title of the video. It's a YouTube presentation by a neuroscientist from England, and I'm trying to think what the title of it is. Anyway, his name's Anil, A-N-I-L-S-E-T-H. If you just put in Anil Seth and YouTube video, TED Talk, you'll be listening to this neuroscientist explain what the mind is doing, and that all we're living in is the structure of the mind if we're living out of carbon-based memory. We've got another, nice piece of documentation in that regard. If you look at the CIA study on human intelligence, and in particular on perception, what the CIA literally, quote, put in writing is, the mind does not record reality, the mind generates reality. And everybody's got one all the time. And everybody's got a story about why their reality is this or that. And most people's stories are about how everybody else is the problem. And if we live in that world, then contact with truth becomes difficult, because perception is something generated by the mind that literally most people use to replace truth. So an event happens, and something resonates in the mind, and what resonates in the body's mind, and the mind of man, as they called it, replaces the opportunity to experience the actuality of what's going on in the world. And this whole body of work is about reversing that and getting to the point where you live out of the true mind of your human beingness, which is the mind of love. In the ancient teachings, and there's nothing religious about this, although it's been turned into religion, that was called the mind of Christ. I remember back about, it's probably 20 years ago now, we have a student who had, to his rabbi, wanted us to come and present at his synagogue. So he set up a meeting between myself and the rabbi, and sat down and started talking about what it was we did. And when he heard that it came from the Aramaic, he was like, okay, you're in. You can come in and present at my synagogue. However, I have one request. I know your orientation is Christian. But he said, I have one request, and that is that you don't use the word Christ. Because if you do, I will never be welcomed back to my synagogue. People have so much baggage around that. It's been turned into so many crazy things, but it simply, in Aramaic, is the name of an office. If I ran for mayor and won the role of mayor, you might call me Mayor Michael or Mayor Ryce. But mayor is not my name, it's the name of the office that I occupy. So one who occupied the office of, or lived out of the mind of love in them, was said to be one who was Christed. And so the objective is to live in that mind rather than having carbon-based memory replacing the actuality, because out of being, we get to experience what's actually happening in the world. Out of the direct intuitive faculty, out of the spiritual faculties, we get to experience what's in the energetic world. And the mind says, well, I want you to put that into words so I can understand, so I can grasp it. And again, that's like getting the fly to understand what the things in the room mean to me. And of course, the things in my room have meaning to me, and those meanings are what I've given them. Great lesson in the Course in Miracles. Everything I look at, Jeanie and I had done some searching a few years back for, she liked these small statuette type things that are masks. And in each, or most of them, there's a face and a mask. So, there's nobody in the world, unless they were living in the intuitive faculty, that would walk into this room and look at these masks and go, oh, Jeanie really liked those, and that's why you went searching for them and bought the whole series. I give them that meaning, but if you walked in my room, unless I shared that with you, you wouldn't have the brain cells to recognize that. Now, if you were living in being, you could attune to that, and you would have access to that meaning. But suffice to say that everything else, every perceptual construct that you have because you have brain cells for that. And if there's upset and disturbance around whatever your brain cells are showing you about any object of attention, that upset or disturbance is about you. It's not about the object of your attention. When I share what meaning these had to Jeanie, it's got nothing to do with the object. Nothing in your world has anything to do with the object of your attention. Everything that you take as meaning has to do with the content of your brain cell structure. And so if there are generations and generations of disturbance and upset and pain and drama, then there are lots of things to look around at and go, oh, drama and drama. They are meanings you give those things. Those things do not own those meanings. Once you recognize that, then you realize that every meaning that you hold, especially the ones based in hostility, fear, and pain, are false meanings. They are not true about what's actually happening in the moment, but they are just replicating what's gone on in the past. Now, this man Yeshua, 2,000 years ago, understanding this, handed people a tool. And the tool was called forgiveness. It had nothing whatsoever to do with, I have a pained meaning in me, but I'm going to let you off the hook for it. That is not forgiveness. I have a pained meaning in me, therefore I'm going to apply forgiveness to the pained meaning I hold in my mind, and I'm going to remove it. And so when you recognize that the Greek world has distorted, when things came out of the Aramaic language that were translated into, pardon me, mistake, I don't mean translated, because they weren't translated. They were interpreted. Everything you see in what they call the Greek scriptures, they talk about them as translations, but they're not translations. They're interpretations. And the first words in this particular saying 54 is just a perfect example of that. And 54, Yeshua says, blessed are the poor. Now again, I don't have this based on translation. I do not have an Aramaic copy of the Book of Thomas to study, and so I have not done that. However, I have done a lot of work with the Aramaic New Testament, a la first century Aramaic Yeshua, and the meaning of his words in Aramaic. And so the Greeks, having meanings in their minds, translated, and again, I don't know with this particular statement whether the Aramaic word is the same as the one that's used in the other scriptures, but the Aramaic word is Tuveyhun. The Greeks interpret that as blessed are they, like, there's something out there that if you do this, we'll approve of you, we'll give you a blessing, then you'll be okay. And if you live in that meaning, let's say, the first word in each of the Beatitudes in Aramaic is Tuveyhun. It's a three-part word. And it says this: a latent neural structure implanted by God to guide you to happiness and well-being becomes your conscious possession, you who, and then instead of being a nice philosophy, the Beatitudes are a set of instructions for how to access the neural structure that was planted within you that's in carbon-based memory, that is part of your, or an extension of your being. So you wouldn't expect anybody who's read the Greek scriptures, and read Blessed Are They, to go, oh, here's an instruction for what I need to do to access the neural structure in me that the Creator gave me to assist me to bypass carbon-based memory. I mean, that's a big piece of information. And if you haven't done the Aramaic Beatitudes, that meaning does not exist in the Greek. Every one of the Beatitudes, and I'm going to treat this as though they're using the word Tuveyhun, although I don't, based on translation, have, or the Aramaic, have awareness of that or verification of that. But seeing as how it fits with the Greek translation of the first one of the Beatitudes, or is pretty close, where it says, the Greeks interpret it as, blessed are the poor in spirit. Now, it's interesting, if you look at that particular Beatitude from Matthew 5, the Greeks are trying, well, let's back up a step. Yeshua says, I come to connect you to the Spirit of truth. You can deny me, you can even deny the Creator, but don't deny the one that I've come to connect you with. And that was, in Aramaic, Ruka de Kucha, that's been translated as the Spirit. So here are the Greeks in the Beatitudes telling us to be poor in the very thing that Yeshua said, this is the only thing that will leave you stuck in unforgiveness if you deny this. So anyone who's been locked into studying the Greek interpretations of the Beatitudes, well, it's kind of a nice philosophy, but there's no way to understand that it's a set of instructions for literally opening and activating an underlying neural structure that you're designed to have from the beginning. And in fact, you do have from the beginning. We all come in with it. But it gets overlaid with all the blame and hostility and fear that we're trained into in the culture. So we have this neural structure, which is designed to be the foundation from which we run our lives, and it's been shut down. So what the word Tuveyhun communicates is that this neural structure that you want to access is latent or unconscious. It's hidden from you. And somebody wants us to believe that by being poor, void of, lacking in, the very thing that Yeshua said, this is the only thing that will leave you in unforgiveness. That word spirit, ruku de kucha in Aramaic. So a latent neural structure implanted by the Creator to guide you to happiness and well-being, possession, you whose home, not who are poor, you whose home is in Ruka de Kucha, or the eternal forces from the Creator. Do you live in your mind? Do you live in perception? Or do you live in contact with the eternal forces from the Creator? So, particular passage in the traditional Beatitudes is about having your home in the eternal forces from the Creator. And it results in the reward aspect. The result of that is said, yours will be in Aramaic would be a heavenly estate. In other words, you will live in contact with the community of love. The words kingdom of heaven don't exist in Aramaic. It speaks of the community of love. So if you're not locked into the external world and you live in these eternal forces, then you are already in and connected to, functioning out of the community of love. And when love is the underlying energy of your life, now you'll notice that we have a world that wants to train us into, no, you need to have hostility, and you need to have punishment, and you need to have fear. Don't you know that fear of God is the beginning of wisdom? And somebody says that in response to a book that over 300 times says, fear not. And an individual teacher named Yeshua who at least 15 times says, fear not, or some variation on the theme of that. And somebody wants you to believe that it is fear of love, of the Creator, that will put you on the path to wisdom. No, actually, it'll put you on the path to self-destruction. It's really a travesty. Yeshua brought this crystal clear, powerful, amazing understanding of the human energy system and how it worked. He was a physician. They called him the great physician for a reason. He was not a theologian. He knew what created wholeness and healing in people, and he gave that to them. Like, for instance, one of the things he gave them was, did you know there's a latent neurostructure in you that's literally designed to guide you to happiness and well-being? Well, guess what? There's several things you can do to keep that neurostructure active. How cool is that? Where did that go? And from there, it just, why are there wars upon wars? Why is there conflict? Why is there rage? Why is there divorce, hatred, vengeance, racism, anti-immigrant status? Why do those things exist? Because we have been separated from the mind in us that will always tell us the truth. And we've been separated by just the simple capacity to generate any form of hostility or fear. I mean, literally, a true human being, no matter what happened in the world, could not generate any form of hostility or fear. You notice with Yeshua, they did everything they could to get him into rage and pain. And what did he do? Stay connected with love. The people who tortured him, as a human being would do, he held in a blessing. It's a great example that sums the whole thing up as Yeshua comes out of the Garden of Gethsemane, where he's gone through his own personal major healing crisis. Sweating blood is a healing crisis. That's what the symptoms of deep, deep healing would look like. And he comes out of the Garden of Gethsemane, he comes out of that healing crisis, and there's Peter. And Peter on the way to the garden, and you notice Peter couldn't stay awake. What he was saying was, he took 3 disciples with him because he was going to do a deep piece of work, and he needed support. So he said, would you guys come with me and hold the space? And he goes in and as he's in the Garden of Gethsemane starting his process, he taps into the 3 support people that he brought with him. The 3 guys that are supposed to be holding the space. And what happened? They're blotto. They go unconscious. They cannot stay in the presence of love or maintain the presence of love for the level of work he's going to do. He comes out and he says, can't you guys even hold the space for an hour? Can't you be the presence of love for a lousy hour? And they couldn't. But he comes out, and Peter, who many want us to believe he was the head honcho, Peter, on the way to the Garden of Gethsemane, had asked, how many swords should we bring? The brain cells these guys have is, we need a savior from Rome, and we are, of course, it's going to be done with swords. We're going to have to kill. And Yeshua's response when he says, how many swords should we bring? He says, just bring one. Can you imagine the meaning that the disciples had, that Peter had for that, I suspect, was, wow, he's going to take one sword and wipe out the whole Roman army. I knew he was good, but this is awesome. So Peter's waiting outside of Gethsemane, and along comes the high priest servant who's going to have Yeshua mercilessly slaughtered. Yeshua knows that. He's shown how intuitive he is. He knows exactly what's coming. That's why he wants to go and cleanse and do this piece of work that he does in the garden. And when he comes out, there's Peter, and he's just tried to whack off the high priest servant's head. And I can imagine that at that moment would have been a moment when Yeshua probably would have given Peter the look. And it's like, Pete, that's not what we're here for. He addresses Peter directly as Satan. He says, get thee behind me, Satan, to Peter. You are Satan, he says. That's a pretty insulting thing in the context of Greek brain cells. But in Aramaic, and you'll notice that Yeshua, when he called him Satan, explained exactly what he meant by Satan. He didn't mean, it had nothing to do with the Greek pantheon of horrific creatures that we're supposed to be terrified of, so that we keep our minds in fear rather than connected to love. But you'll notice what he said to Peter. He said, get thee behind me, Satan, or you think in the mind of man, carbon-based memory, rather than the plan of God. You're attuned to your own little self and the meanings you give it, and you think you're going to lose if I carry out the plan I have, and so you're going to try and stop me from completing my plan? Get behind me, Satan. And then where Peter, symbolizing the world mind, the mind of man, Peter's going to kill this guy. What does Yeshua do? He stops him. And he does what a human being would do. He does what the created essence of love would do. Instead of an attack on the high priest servant who's now injured and bleeding, he reaches forward and brings healing to the man. He's demonstrating the power of living as active present love. Now, I've had people who've said, well, Michael, that's an interesting interpretation of that, but did you notice doing that behavior got him dead? It's like, yep, I noticed doing that behavior got him dead. Did you notice they couldn't keep him that way? That's what he came to teach. Not the meaning that the world gives, suffering, pain, trauma, damage, look what they've done to. No. He stood as a human being doing what human beings do. And what do human beings do? No matter what's going on in their world, they bring forward love. And so he heals the high priest servant, the man who's going to have him mercilessly slaughtered. And on the other side of the slaughter, because he didn't buy into the meanings of carbon-based memory, because he was, as he's describing here, one of those who was living connected to the community of love, functioning as a human being, he comes out the other side of his death, fully intact. Now, that's a big challenge for those who've given meanings of death and suffering and drama and trauma to virtually everything that happens that they don't agree with. And most people have no clue that it's their minds that give the meanings to the things that they experience. If Jeanie came into the room and I was pointing out these small art figures to someone, she would have a similar meaning to mine. It wouldn't be exactly the same about those figures, but nobody else in the world would have those meanings because nobody else in the world has those brain cells. Until you acquire the brain cells of this man Yeshua, his meanings aren't available to you. And as you acquire the brain cells, then having those brain cells what was called the mind of man becomes a stepping stone into the next phase, into the next level of living a human life. And you recognize that it's not about getting lots of stuff. It's not about being a good commercial servant. It's not about making a ton of money. It's about acquiring and living from a state of human life, which is a state of love. So this first Beatitude says that there are underlying, or pardon me, this statement 54 gives us a whole other level of understanding when we have the brain cells. And before I go on to 55, Miss Jeanie, do we have anything happening in the chat room? Anybody in the phone queue with a hand up?
No, it is all quiet still.
Okay, cool. So 55. Now this is a tough one because we're back to Greek words again. And here we have Yeshua in statement 55 in the Gospel of Thomas saying, "He who shall not hate his father and his mother cannot be my disciple. And he who does not hate his brethren and his sisters and take up his cross like me shall not be worthy of me." Well, wait a minute. I thought this teaching was based in love. Yes, it is. But when the Greeks get a hold of it, it gets pretty hairy sometimes. So in this case, and in the scriptures, where Yeshua, in the traditional scriptures where Yeshua says, you must hate your mother and your father, in Aramaic, the word that's been translated as hate is not hate as in a love-hate relationship. It's those who are separated from. So you'll notice, and we do a workshop, Penance to Interdependence, where we introduce the idea of a power person. And a power person, for most people, their power person, or at least their primary power person, and you can have many, is a parent. And so 3 things happen to produce this dynamic in the mind called the power person dynamic. Power person was not functioning as love. Again, it's usually a parent with a child. The power person had more power over the child than the child did, and the child perceived it as survival. In that circumstance, recognizing that we are energetic beings, one's energy field simply breaks open. It becomes wide open like a sponge and literally just absorbs every energy in the environment. You have to separate from that. You have to learn to remove that. And if you don't, and this is what he's talking about here, it's not hate. Again, it's a love-hate relationship. It's recognize the damage that power person dynamic does in you and remove it. Separate yourself from it. Move apart from it and heal it. So it's not just mother and father, but and for those, if you want to take a deeper look at it, if you go to our website, in the upper right-hand corner are all the social media links. And if you click on our YouTube channel and do a search for living, not saying, oh, pardon me, no. What's the title of the video that we do? Honor thy father and thy mother. Talk about that command, and it is an absolute command. If you have a parent where you have some sort of trauma, and you never, in the word honor in Aramaic would be to bring love into activity toward. If you never honor your father and your mother, and there was trauma in that relationship, then you will never resolve or heal that trauma. because the act of honoring is a command that's speaking of living from, connecting to the space of being and bringing that active presence of love through your physiology toward the parent. And so if I'm able to do that by bringing forward a behavior keyed to my true being as love and passing that energy through my physiology, whatever energetic dynamics I've acquired from traumatic time with that power person, those things heal in me. This is not something that's about a gift to your parents. And actually, it's a more dramatically important command to follow if there was a lot of trauma in that early relationship. And by so doing, you get to heal yourself. So what he's saying is, if you want to be my disciple, if you really want to do my work, you've got to show up in the world as conscious, active, present love. Well, but wait a minute, Michael, you don't know what they did. I don't care what they did. The worse it was, the more important it is that you show up as the presence of love. Because by so doing, by bringing that energy, remember, love, just think about the Grand Canyon. How many years did it take for water flowing through the Grand Canyon to carve out the Grand Canyon? Water being the master solvent. If it runs long enough over something, whatever it is going to wear away. The master solvent for trauma in relationships, whether it's parent or any other relationship, the master solvent for that is conscious, active, present love. So honor is to bring that presence of love that you are and function from that, offering it to your power person. And when that energy, that solvent, passes through you, any trauma or pain you have in that relationship will be resonating, and by bringing that master solvent through that part of yourself, that will dissolve in you. You'll free yourself of it. And then he goes on to say, and who does not hate his brethren and his sisters. If I have a challenging relationship with brother, friend, neighbor, sister, the way I get to heal is the same principle we've been talking about, is by functioning from a space of love in their presence, because in their presence, remember the law of resonance, all that has to happen is the trigger for something be present in our world, and it's going to resonate or move that energy. Example, don't think about the color of your car. If I say don't think about the color of your car, what happens? The brain cells relating to the color of your car start to resonate. They start to move. So if there's a person that you've had a challenge with and you're carrying around an unresolved, pained dynamic within yourself, when you bring forward the active presence of love into behavior for them, toward them, you get to heal. And to do that, the last line of this particular saying is, you got to take up your cross like me. You notice he didn't say, please take up my cross. He says, let's read the whole thing. He who shall not hate his father and his mother cannot be my disciple. And he who does not hate his brethren and his sisters and take up his cross like me shall not be worthy of me. You'll notice this is not an invitation for you to take up his cross. I think about over the years, all the years that I was on the road, and oftentimes was on the road at Easter. And I can remember several cities where there'd be somebody who's fashioned themselves a huge wooden cross, and here they are hauling it around town, mimicking Yeshua, with no idea that his invitation to take up your cross meant, what is it in you that keeps you from functioning as conscious, active, present love? What meanings do you hold for life that brings fear, hostility, rage, guilt, grief, and pain forward from your carbon-based memory system? So his instruction is, you got to do your work. Take up your cross. And, until you've really got the brain cells for it and or you've got the support for doing it, it's a tough thing to do. It's a tough thing to remember that that's what you're doing, that you're taking up your cross, that if you're interacting with someone who's been abusive with you and up comes your rage, that taking up your cross means you own your rage. You stop blaming whoever the object of attention is, and you realize that rage is a meaning that you've given to this thing. And that by letting loose of, by forgiving that rage, like Yeshua did. So Yeshua did his work, the modeling of what he did in the Garden of Gethsemane. He was doing his work. That's why he sweat blood. That's why the symptoms were so dramatic. As a naturopathic physician, if I saw someone sweating blood and I knew they were connected to love and were doing their work, then I would say, oh, this is a perfect healing crisis. The body is now releasing whatever is not needed within it. And that would come from that that level of healing would come from a space of very profound connectedness to love. So he's saying, if you can't do those things, you're not ready yet. Go back and do your work. And you remember the particular case where, and I bring this up a lot because it's such an important key. It's so easy to forget. But there's a case where there are a number of disciples, more than the 12. We're not told exactly how many were there, but it sounded like it was a pretty good number of people. And they're saying to Yeshua, what do we need to do to please the Creator? And in essence, Yeshua says, take up your cross. What kind of guilt, fear, rage, hatred, vengeance, grief, pain, trauma do you have? Stop blaming anybody else for the fact that it's in you and start to own it and begin forgiving it. Begin removing that energy. You go back and you read that passage, and he used a symbol, or an idiom, pardon me, when he said, you have to do your work. He said, the process of healing must be entered, is essence what he was saying. And what did the disciples, half of them, what did they say? Too hard a saying. And they grumbled and they turned tail and they left and they never came back. When you're asked to really own, if your rage is up or your blame is up or your hatred is up. And I said, yeah, and notice that's yours. Most people would turn and take my head off if they could. Playing John the Baptist is about. Or John the Baptist delivered information to the king and queen they didn't want to hear. When people are in their pain and they've got somebody else they comfortably blame, they don't want to hear that. They're in blockage truth. The pain is internal, but they've got it linked. Their perceptual mind has got it linked to somebody else, and it's all somebody else's fault. And when you say to that person, wait a minute, that's yours, you need to own that, they will tend to go nuts and want to take your head off. Notice that's what they did with John the Baptist. And what did they call John the Baptist? He was called the raving maniac in the desert. What is that about? Why? Well, remember the 40 years in the desert? The desert is a code word for the unconscious. That story about 40 years in the desert was not about a hot, sandy place. It was about living from the unconscious mind. 40 years in the desert is the average time most people spend before they start to wake up and go, oh, this is happening to me again because this is inside of me. This belongs to me. I need to take up my cross. and do my work. Oh, I finally hear what Yeshua said. This rage belongs to me. You'll notice John the Baptist, the raving maniac in the desert. Why did they call him that? And you'll notice he was the forerunner of the Christ mind. Oh, wait a minute, how does all that fit together? If you're ever going to truly discover the mind of being in you, and you're living from carbon-based memory, somebody who can reach into your unconscious and reflect it back to you directly is going to be necessary. That's someone who can reach into your desert. So John the Baptist, what did he do? He supported people facing their own raging maniacal mind. The king and queen, when they were given information they didn't want to look at, they didn't want to be responsible for, what did she do? She arranged to literally have his head taken off. And you'll know if you watch somebody doing their number and they're blaming somebody, you say, well, let's see, would you be willing to entertain that maybe this is yours and it's about you? All over you. And that's basically what they did to John the Baptist. But if you're ever going to truly awaken into what they call the mind of Christ, truly awaken in it, you're going to have to meet your John the Baptist, the one who can reach into your unconscious and reflect back to you accurately that whatever it is you're projecting is about you. Whatever it is you're feeling, whatever it is you're seeing, is produced by your own brain cells. And until you clean them out, that is, until you take up your cross, Yeshua is saying, you can't really function in harmony with me. And so that's saying 55. And it looks like we're down to about 7 or 8 minutes. So, Miss Jeanie, do we have anybody in the phone queue with a hand up? Anything happening in the chat room before I go on to 56? I can hear you speaking, Jeanie, but you're not coming through.
I guess I'm muted.
Unmute. That's it. That old mute challenge thing. I know that one.
So we only have 8 minutes left, but I got a long email from a young lady named Melanie, and so she is on the switchboard. However, we don't have time to go through the worksheet today. But Melanie, if you call tomorrow at the beginning of the show and press 1, we can walk you through a worksheet, and that would be, we'd love to do that for you.
Absolutely. Yeah, we're here to support the real work. So is there anything you can tell me about what the emails give us the bottom line of it, that we might be able to give Melanie some support at this moment to tide her over until tomorrow?
I haven't read through the whole thing. The very beginning of it talks about a conflict that she had with her parents when she visited them, and the triggers that arise during the interaction with her family. And I had worked with her once before and told her that it sounded like avoidance and denial were her coping mechanisms. And she says, I would like to write a ton of information here to explain my experiences and what led to my decision, but I won't. Anyway, the other day, my son, who's almost 12 and in the past was close to them, they used to babysit him when he was 3 or 4, said that he misses them and he wants to see them. I want to make the right choice. I think for the past 3 months or so, I've been rationalizing estrangement from them when that's probably really not the best choice. I think because my conscience keeps returning to this topic of obsession, I really feel it's best to allow minimal contact with them for my children. I know they're really angry at me, too, for some things that I said. They're insistent on addressing what I said and did and trying to change my mind about it. My entire life, they've tried to control how I perceive things and the choices that I make. They're literally trying to control my mind, and yet they lived extremely dysfunctional lives themselves. I'll do a worksheet on that one, too. Triggers often happen so constantly that I don't have enough time to work through all of them in order to perceive actuality and exist based on that. And she goes on. It's quite a lengthy email.
Mm-hmm.
And
so breathing with you, first of all.
You mentioned the honoring father and mother earlier. That might be a good starting point, too. for her to watch
yes,
that.
I think in jumping on our YouTube channel and watching that would probably be quite useful to you, Melanie. And so we're here to support you. And if you're on the phone and you want to push one, if you've got a thought, we've got a couple minutes. We can maybe help get you on the road to the next level of healing.
She didn't push one, but I'm going to turn on her microphone and just see. Welcome, Melanie.
Hi. I don't know when my daughter might distract me, but I mean, I heard everything Michael was saying, and it kind of felt like he was talking to me in response to that email. So
okay.
I have a little bit more information about, I mean, it sounds like what he was telling me is I need to do more worksheets until I have the vitality to take up my cross and be in the conscious, active presence of love in their presence. So I guess that's my struggle, is I don't know how to, well, I do know how to, but I don't.
It's a process.
I don't know.
And my offering,
I'm not ready to be in the conscious, active presence of love in their presence. And I guess my struggle with it right now, after hearing everything that he said before you brought up the email, is that my parents aren't doing their work. Like, they're not being in the conscious, active presence of love with me. And part of the reason
right.
why I'm avoiding them is so that I don't have to deal with future conflict. But I know in my heart, like, I just feel that I should just minimize contact and then let my son interact with them, because my interactions with them are usually brief, but I'm in just so much resistance that I'm stuck constantly analyzing what to do. I went to Susan's support group earlier, and I got a lot of really helpful information. So
awesome. So my offering at this moment would be to recognize when you say, I'm not ready to be in the conscious, active presence of love with him now. And my offering is that this is not something you're doing for them. The conscious, active presence of love is your human life. It literally is who you truly are. All of the other stuff is mind stuff. That's all part of the non-being self. And so my offering would be that, and hopefully via, in the way of inspiration, to just recognize that you want to reclaim your human life here. So being in the practice, think back to your son when he was an infant, and if you were in a clear space and held him and tapped into his essence, what would his essence have been? How would you have described it?
Innocent, precious, and love.
Yeah. So that's what you and I are. That's what your parents are. They've forgotten. And you remember the line on the worksheet that says, when I choose love, it wakes up the love in everyone. When I choose to function out of my state of being, sooner or later, because we live in an energetic world, if I take a middle C tuning fork and hit it on the desk and put it in front of a second middle C tuning fork, that second middle C tuning fork has no choice. It starts to resonate. It starts to move because of the presence of the energy that's there. If your parents have forgotten who they are and have no interest in doing their work, one of the most important things I would offer that you'll need to do is to reclaim your life unconditioned, like not considering them as a condition or whether they're doing it or not doing it, but rather you want to reclaim your aliveness and the truth about yourself. And when you do that, and you do that on a continuous basis, sooner or later, because that is the truth about them too, they've forgotten it, sooner or later that space is going to wake up in them, is going to start to move in them, and you're going to get a different response. In the meantime, it sounds like they know exactly how to push every button that you've got and are really playing the role of showing you everything they've ever instilled in you and not dealt with.
Right.
And so I would just hold the space of joining you in being the presence of love, whatever they do, and giving yourself and your son that modeling that gift.
Yeah, that's true.
And so if you'd like, the show it's just announced in my ear that we're going to get cut off. So if you'd like to do a worksheet on this tomorrow, let's start right off at the beginning of the show and go for it.
Okay, I'll keep that in mind. Thank you.
All right. Awesome.
Okay.
Holding the space for you. All right. Blessings. Thanks, everybody, for joining us. Great, the best year yet of your eternal life. It's an awesome gift to give the world.